Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Ready to really get into a Supreme Court case with me. It has the potential, I think, to totally change how we even think about discrimination at work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's Ames v. Ohio, and I gotta say, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So basically, you have Marlean Ames. She's a straight white woman, and she's suing the Ohio Department of Youth Services. She says she was passed over for promotions, even demoted, and less qualified LGBTQ plus employees were given those jobs instead.
Right.
Now, this isn't just some, personal career battle. This case really gets us thinking about some huge questions about equality and how does our legal system even handle discrimination? It's complicated.
It is.
Is it ever fair to have different standards of proof based on whether the person is part of a majority or a minority group?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
And could this case maybe make it easier for anyone to sue for discrimination no matter their background?
Oh, for sure.
And then how does all of this connect to all the debates going on about DEI initiatives?
That's a big one.
So to start breaking this down, let's look at the laws surrounding this case.
Okay, well, it all starts with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Okay.
And this law says you can't discriminate in the workplace based on race, color, religion, sex, or where someone's from originally. And in 2020, the Supreme Court decided that discriminating based on sexual orientation, that's covered too as sex discrimination.
Right. That part seems pretty simple.
Right.
But with most things legal, there are always little details. And those details are what Ames v. Ohio is all about. Can you give us more on that?
Yeah, the big thing here is this thing called the background circumstances requirement.
Okay.
Some courts use this. What it basically means is, in those courts, straight, white, male plaintiffs, they have to show way more evidence of discrimination than minority plaintiffs would to win their case.
Yep.
It actually goes back to a case from 1973, McDonnell Douglas Court v. Green. That case made a framework for proving discrimination when you don't have direct evidence. And some courts have said that framework means majority plaintiffs, they got to jump through more hoops.
Gotcha. Okay, so we have this legal situation where in some courts, it's harder for certain people to prove discrimination based on who they are.
Right.
And then Marlean Ames comes along and says, hold up, this isn't right.
Exactly. And what's amazing is that a lot of people agree with her, even some very different justices on the Supreme Court.
Whoa. So even people with totally opposite viewpoints, they agree.
We do.
That's surprising. Tell me more about how this whole case has played out.
Well, it all goes back to 2004 when Ames started at ODYS.
Oh, wait.
She was moving up, getting promotions, showed she was dedicated and all. But in 2017, she got a new supervisor, Janine Trim, and Trim is openly gay.
Oh, okay.
And actually, Trim even gave Ames a good performance review.
So, no issues there.
Doesn't seem like it. But then, in 2019, everything changed.
This is where the timeline that our listener sent in comes in, right?
Exactly.
It shows that Ames was passed over for a promotion, and they gave it to a gay woman who Ames says was less qualified.
That's right.
And then, to make it worse, they removed Ames from her position and offered her a demotion with a pay cut.
Yep. And you know who replaced her? A gay man with less seniority.
Oh, wow.
All of that is why Ames believes that her being straight was a factor in these decisions. That's why she sued.
And that's what brought the case to the Supreme Court. Wow.
You got it.
So can you tell me more about the key players in this case?
Okay, on one side we have Ames, and she's represented by a lawyer named Xiao Wang. They say this background circumstances requirement is just plain unfair. It makes it harder for people like Ames, who are in the majority, to prove they were discriminated against.
Gotcha.
They want everyone to have the same standards of proof in these cases.
So Ames is like, discrimination is discrimination. It doesn't matter who it's against.
That's it. Then on the other side, we have Elliot Gazer. He's Ohio's Solicitor General, and he's representing ODYS. And his position is a little more, complicated.
Complicated how?
Well, he agrees with the justices that it's wrong to hold people to different standards based on things like their race or sexual orientation.
Wait, so both sides agree that having different standards is wrong?
Yeah, that seems to be the case.
That's huge.
It is. But what Gazer is saying is even under the normal McDonnell-Douglas framework, which doesn't say anything about different standards for majority plaintiffs, Ames hasn't shown enough evidence to prove she was discriminated against.
So Ohio is saying, yeah, the different standards are wrong, but even without them, Ames wouldn't win. Interesting.
Right. It's tricky.
I mean, for Ohio to agree that the different standards are wrong, that's got to be important for the outcome of the case.
Definitely. It seems like the Supreme Court might get rid of that background circumstances requirement entirely.
Wow.
But the big question is what will happen after they make that decision?
Good point, and we'll definitely talk about that more.
We should.
But first, let's focus on what happened during the oral arguments at the Supreme Court. Things got pretty interesting there, right?
They did. Justice Gorsuch pointed out right away how everyone agreed that the background circumstances thing was unfair, which is not very common, you know?
I read about that. It seemed like Justice Kavanaugh had a pretty strong opinion, too. What was his take?
Justice Kavanaugh thought the court should just say, flat out, that discrimination based on sexual orientation is illegal, whether you're gay or straight.
Okay.
And he said the rules for proving discrimination should be the same for everyone.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Were there other justices who said anything interesting?
Oh, yeah. Justice Kagan actually seemed kind of confused by Ohio's position.
Really?
She basically said, you're saying the appeals court made a mistake, but you're still defending their decision.
Interesting.
It was like Ohio was contradicting itself.
Wow. Sounds like the justices were really thinking hard about this case. And it's a big deal. The court's decision could change how all discrimination cases are handled in the future.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe it'll be easier for people to file lawsuits no matter who they are.
Could be.
But before we get into all that, tell me more about Marlean Ames herself. What led her to file this lawsuit?
Right. Okay. Well, from what we know, it seems like she had a really good career at ODYS.
Okay.
She started in 2004 and was getting promoted regularly. Things were fine until 2017. That's when she started reporting to a new supervisor, Janine Trim.
And we know Trim is openly gay.
Right.
What was their working relationship like? Was there tension because of their sexual orientations?
From the information we have, it seems like they were professional. In fact, Trim even gave Ames a good performance review in 2018.
No problems.
Not that we know of. But then in 2019, things started going bad for Ames. And it ended with her being passed over for a promotion and then getting demoted.
And that's when Ames started to think, maybe my being straight has something to do with this. She felt like they were promoting LGBTQ plus people who weren't as qualified as her.
It's important to remember, though, that we only have the information from court documents and news reports. We don't know everything that happened at ODYS. We're only getting Ames's side of the story.
That's a good point. We need to be aware of that. But her experiences, as she describes them, they definitely bring up some big questions about fairness at work.
They do.
Let's talk more about what this case could mean for employers and employees.
Oh, yeah, this case is a hot topic, especially among HR people and lawyers who deal with employment law. Everyone's talking about it.
I bet.
Because if the Supreme Court sides with Ames, it could really change how employers do things like hiring and promotions.
Okay.
It could even affect how they do diversity and inclusion programs.
Can you explain that a bit more? What are some of the things that employers are worried about?
Well, one big worry is that more people might start suing for discrimination.
Oh, I see.
If the court gets rid of that background circumstances requirement, it could be easier for anyone to file a lawsuit, no matter who they are.
Makes sense.
So employers are going to have to be really careful to make sure everything they do is fair and unbiased.
So should employers just stop doing DEI stuff to avoid these lawsuits?
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
It's more about making sure that those DEI efforts are truly inclusive. You know, you don't want to accidentally disadvantage any group, majority or minority. The goal is to have a workplace where everyone has a fair chance based on how good they are at their job, not their background.
So not ditching BEI, just making it better, making sure it's really fair.
Exactly.
What can employers do to, protect themselves legally after this case?
One big thing is to really look at how they hire and promote people.
Okay.
Make sure they have clear rules for deciding who gets the job.
Gotcha.
And make sure they're following those rules every time.
Yeah, consistency is key.
And they should train their managers on all this stuff.
Training on what specifically?
Things like implicit bias, those unconscious biases we all have.
Right.
And how to recognize microaggressions, those little subtle things that can make people feel excluded.
Right.
And they need to know the laws about discrimination. That's crucial.
Sounds like this case is making employers step up their game.
It is.
Which might be a good thing in the long run.
Definitely.
Now, what about employees? What does this case mean for them?
It's a reminder that they have rights. Title VII, which we talked about before, protects people from discrimination based on a bunch of things, like their race, religion, sex, where they're from, and their sexual orientation.
Okay, so if someone at work feels like they've been discriminated against, what should they do?
The most important thing is to keep records.
Of what?
Any conversations, emails, performance reviews, anything that could help prove their case.
Gotcha.
If they feel comfortable, they could try talking to their supervisor or HR about it.
And if that doesn't work?
Then they might want to talk to a lawyer who specializes in employment law. The lawyer can help them figure out what to do.
So this case could give more people the courage to speak up if they think they've been treated unfairly.
It could.
It's about making things fair for everyone.
Exactly.
And remember, the law is always changing.
Always.
Cases like Ames v. Ohio can make big changes. They make us rethink how we deal with discrimination.
For sure.
We're all waiting for the Supreme Court's decision, which come out by June 2025.
Yep.
But it's clear that this case is already making people talk, and it's making both employers and employees think about how to make workplaces more inclusive and equitable.
Couldn't agree more.
This has been super informative. Any last thoughts before we move on? Anything our listeners should be thinking about as they learn more about this case?
Let me see. I think the biggest takeaway, no matter what the Supreme Court decides, is that this case has started a really important conversation about discrimination and how we achieve real equality at work.
True.
It's challenging us to really think about our own biases, whether we realize we have them or not, and to ask ourselves if the ways we're dealing with discrimination are actually working.
That's a great point. It's like this case is saying we need to do more than just check boxes.
Totally.
We need to actually create a culture where everyone feels like they belong and are respected for who they are.
Exactly. And that takes constant effort. We need to keep talking about it, keep learning, and be willing to change how we do things.
I like that.
Yeah, we have to be willing to ask hard questions, listen to different viewpoints, and be open to new ideas.
This case really shows how complicated discrimination can be.
It does.
It's not always black and white.
Oh.
And there are good arguments on both sides. It seems like a big challenge we face as a society is figuring out how to recognize that discrimination has happened in the past, while also trying to make laws that treat everyone the same, regardless of their background.
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. And this case really makes us confront that. So as we wait for the Supreme Court to make their decision, anything specific our listeners should be looking out for? What might influence their decision?
It'll be interesting to see how they balance the idea of treating everyone equally under the law with the fact that inequalities still exist because of what's happened in the past.
Right. Yeah.
Will they just get rid of that background circumstances requirement? Or will they give more guidance on how to handle discrimination cases in a way that's fair to everyone?
It's a big decision. It could change how things work for a long time.
Absolutely.
Definitely a case to keep an eye on. Any final thoughts?
One more thing to think about. No matter what happens in Ames v. Ohio, the fact that we're having these conversations is a good thing.
I agree.
We're becoming more aware of the complexities of discrimination, and we're thinking more about how to create workplaces where everyone feels welcome and included.
And that's important progress.
It is. We're all still learning and figuring this out together.
Well said. This case is a good reminder that achieving equality is a journey, and we all need to keep working at it.
I agree.
We need to keep talking, keep learning, and keep trying to make the world a fairer place for everyone.
Well said.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this deep dive. We encourage you to keep learning about this case, stay tuned for the Supreme Court's decision, and most importantly, keep talking about these issues.
Keep those conversations going.
Until next time.
From what I see in these sources, it looks like Marlean Ames, she had a good career at ODYS.
Yeah, she did.
You know, she started way back in 2004.
A while ago.
Yeah, it just kept getting promoted. Things were good until 2017 when she started reporting to Janine Trim.
Right, and Trim is openly gay.
Yeah.
Do we know anything about how they worked together? Was there, tension because of their sexual orientations?
It doesn't seem like it. From what we know, they kept it professional.
Okay.
Trim even gave Ames a good performance review. This was in 2018.
So no problems then?
Not that we know of.
Interesting.
But then the very next year, things went south for Ames, and she ended up being passed over for a promotion and then demoted.
And that's when Ames started to think, maybe this is happening because I'm straight. She thought maybe they were promoting LGBTQ plus people who weren't as qualified.
Right, but it's important to remember, we're only seeing what's in the court documents and news reports.
True.
We don't know for sure what happened at ODYS. It's just Ames' side of the story.
Right, of course. But her experience, even just as she tells it, it makes you think about fairness at work.
It really does.
So let's talk about what this case could mean for employers and employees.
Oh, yeah. This case is making a lot of people nervous, especially in HR, and among lawyers who deal with employment law.
I bet.
A lot of people are watching this case.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Because if the court says Ames is right, it could totally change how employers do things, like hiring and promoting people.
Okay.
And it could even affect how they handle diversity and inclusion initiatives.
Wow. So what are employers worried about specifically?
Well, one thing is that they might get sued more often.
Because of this case.
Yeah, if the Supreme Court gets rid of that background circumstances requirement, it might be easier for people to sue no matter their background.
Oh, I see.
So employers have to be super careful to make sure everything they do is fair and doesn't discriminate against anyone.
So are you saying they should stop doing DEI stuff altogether?
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay.
I think it's more about making sure their DEI programs are really inclusive.
Right.
So that they're not accidentally disadvantaging any group, whether it's a majority or a minority.
Yeah, I get it.
The goal is to make sure everyone has a fair chance based on how good they are at their job, not their background.
So not about getting rid of DEI, but making sure it's fair for everyone.
Exactly.
What can employers do to, protect themselves legally, considering what might happen with this case?
One important thing is to really look at their hiring and promotion processes.
Okay.
Make sure they have clear, objective criteria for evaluating candidates, like specific skills or experience. And make sure they're using those same criteria every time for every candidate.
Consistency is key.
For sure. And they should train their managers on all this stuff.
Like what?
Well, things like implicit bias, those unconscious biases we all have.
Yeah.
And how to recognize microaggressions, those small things that can make people feel left out or disrespected.
Right.
And of course, they need to know the laws about discrimination really well.
Sounds like this case is forcing employers to be more careful and thoughtful.
It is, and that might be a good thing in the long run.
Now, let's switch gears and talk about employees. What does this case mean for them?
It reminds them that they have rights. Title VII, that law we talked about, it protects them from being discriminated against based on a lot of things.
Like what?
Things like their race, their religion, their sex, where they're from, and their sexual orientation.
So if an employee thinks they've been discriminated against, what should they do?
It's really important to document everything.
What do you mean?
Keep track of any conversations, emails, performance reviews, anything that could help them prove what happened.
I see.
And if they feel okay doing it, they can talk to their supervisor or HR.
Okay.
But if that doesn't work, or they don't feel comfortable doing that, they might want to talk to a lawyer who specializes in these kinds of cases.
So a lawyer who knows about employment law.
Exactly. The lawyer can help them figure out what to do.
So this case might give more people the confidence to speak up if they've been treated unfairly.
Yeah, it could really level the playing field.
It's about making sure everyone has a fair chance, no matter who they are.
Exactly. And remember, laws are always changing.
That's true.
And cases like Ames v. Ohio, they can really push for those changes.
It makes people rethink how we deal with discrimination.
Yep, totally.
We're all waiting for the Supreme Court to make a decision.
Should be sometime by June 2025.
But this case is already making people talk and think about how to make workplaces more inclusive and fair for everyone.
It really is.
This has been super informative. Before we wrap up, is there anything else our listeners should be thinking about? Anything they should be paying attention to as they learn more about this case?
Well, we've talked about a lot in this deep dive into Ames v. Ohio. We've gone over the legal stuff, what it could mean for employers and employees, and even the viewpoints of the people involved.
Yeah, we really dug in.
I think as we finish up, the most important takeaway, no matter how the Supreme Court rules, is that this case has gotten people talking about discrimination and how to make workplaces truly equal.
I agree.
It's making us question what we think, recognize our biases, and think about whether what we're doing to stop discrimination is really working.
It's like we're moving past just checking boxes.
Exactly.
And actually trying to create a culture where everyone feels valued and respected for who they are.
Yeah, and that takes constant work. We need to keep having these conversations, keep learning, and be willing to change.
This case really shows that discrimination is complicated.
It is.
It's not always clear-cut.
Not at all.
There are strong arguments on both sides. It seems like finding that balance, recognizing that discrimination has happened in the past, but also wanting laws that treat everyone equally, that's a big challenge for us as a society.
Absolutely. And this case makes us face that head on.
So as we wait for the Supreme Court's decision, anything we should be paying attention to? What could influence their decision?
It'll be interesting to see how they balance treating everyone equally under the law with the need to fix those inequalities that still exist because of what's happened in the past.
Right.
Will they just get rid of that background circumstances rule, or will they give more specific guidance on how to handle these cases fairly?
Sounds like their decision will have a big impact, could change things for a long time.
For sure.
Definitely worth following. Any last thoughts?
Just one more thing. I think no matter what the outcome of Ames v. Ohio is, the fact that we're having these conversations is huge.
I agree.
We're more aware of how complex discrimination is, and we're thinking more about how to make workplaces welcoming for everyone.
That's a positive step.
It is. We're all still learning and figuring this out as we go.
This case reminds us that achieving equality is a journey. It's something we always have to work towards.
Couldn't agree more.
We need to keep talking, keep learning, and keep working to make the world a fairer place for everyone.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We encourage you to keep learning about this case, stay tuned for the Supreme Court's decision, and keep talking about these important issues.
Keep the conversation going.
Until next time.